Hello, my name is Todd Crush. I am with Paul, also known as Paulie Forsyth. From where are you from again? You're in Europe, but
Yeah,
UK,
London. So let's say
London.
London.
Okay.
Yeah.
London, okay. And Paul is a avid runner, a family man. He studied philosophy and theology at St. Mary's, which is pretty cool because I actually went to St. Mary's too, but here in the States, different, same name, different school. And he was looking for the meaning of life and still hasn't found it, and none of us have. So he's married to Sam very happily and has two children, Lucas and Charlie. Paul, thank you for your courage to do this. Before we get started, I have to give a trigger warning. Suicidal ideation may be discussed, mental health topics, abuse, trauma, symptoms, medications, things like that. So if you are triggered by those things, please watch carefully and
Yeah.
turn it off if you need to.
Yeah.
So, Paulie, let's begin. I'm going to rattle off a few. Well, let's start with some running things here first, okay? How long have you been running and what brought you to it?
Running. I'm very open and honest, Todd. I have an addictive personality. And sadly, well, sometimes sadly, sometimes not. I had a massive issue with drugs and alcohol, especially in the late 80s and the 90s, when the rave scene in the UK was massive. So what happened there was I couldn't just take it as a recreation. It literally controlled and took over my life. So I had a near-death experience, and I must state for the record, I took a drugs overdose not to end my life. It was a very, very heavy weekend of drug abuse, but that was my wake-up call. I literally ended up on a hospital surgery, internal bleeding. So then I was at crossroads in my life, So I decided, and actually, do you know what? Let's do something else. And it was actually a doctor that said to me, have you thought of taking up running? And I went, I used to run at school when I was younger. So I thought, yeah, do you know what? And I just went out, did a 5K run, 3 miles, and I haven't looked back. That is now
Yeah.
my addiction.
Well, thank you for sharing. That's
Yeah.
powerful stuff. And, I know you've been doing it for a while. I think the park
Yeah.
runs are big with you, aren't they? The park runs that you guys do, that's fun.
Massive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What do you enjoy most about running itself? We'll get back into mental health here in a little bit, but what do you enjoy
Yeah.
most about the running experience?
I like I like it to free myself. I read one of your things the other day where you run without a watch now. And
Yeah.
we call it naked running. Not to get confused with naked running,
Yeah.
but you're not actually taking anything with you. So I
Yeah.
actually very similar to you. I would love to say to you that I'm not obsessed with times, but I'd be lying if I was doing a half marathon or a marathon. I'm a slave to Strava. But when I'm doing an ultra marathon, different thing altogether. I like the outside. I like the experience. No headphones on, no nothing. It's me, nature. And I know some of my fellow runners laugh. It's a spiritual journey.
Yeah.
I've just come back. I've just come back from the Sahara Desert. I did a run in the Sahara Desert 3 weeks ago, and and I was talking to other people there just about running. And you know what? We laughed and joked at the end of it, but they've contacted me back and they've gone, you know what, Paul? It was a spiritual journey. We get it. We
Yeah.
understand it. Because it's not always about sort of like, going out, I must do this, I must do that. It's about freeing yourself physically and mentally. So
Yeah.
this is something that I enjoy about it.
Yeah, that's very well said. I mean, in my journey, on the running pages and things, I get asked all the time, what's your pace, what's your time? And I intentionally don't share that just because, I know that, a few years ago when I first started running, if I, if I remember getting caught up in what other people were able to do that I couldn't even
Yeah.
touch. And I thought, man, not to, put myself up above anyone, I'm not, but if I had seen what I'm doing now back then, I would have been like, no,
Yeah.
forget it.
Yeah.
And then it also got even to a point maybe 4 or 5 months ago where I realized with my watch, with all my stats, with my data and everything else, I was doing that to myself, like the runner I was yesterday.
Yeah.
And Theodore Roosevelt said, comparison is the thief of joy. And whether you're doing it with others or yourself, it's the same thing. And now that that's gone, I
Yeah.
just run until I'm tired, and then I come home.
You know, I always say my wife Sam, she's just taken up running herself now.
Oh,
And you know, first of all, she was very much like, you know, I can't keep up with you. It's not about that, you know. So one of
yeah.
my mantras, you know, on that as
Mhm.
well, is every runner, you're on your own journey. Don't follow them. Don't follow
Right.
them. Your journey is your journey. Doesn't matter if you're fast. Yeah, I always say the hardest thing you can do is to lace up and get out the door. You know, if you can do that, even if it's a walk, it's a victory. You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah. And if you incorporate mental health into that, a lot of the people I've coached and worked with and ran with too have really struggled with that first step. I did,
yeah,
in my journey. I have schizophrenia, so the paranoia, the
yeah,
hallucinations, I have very heavy, or had very heavy anxiety, and
yeah,
just being anywhere was hard. But running was one of the things that really helped me get to a point where I can do what everybody else takes for granted, like going to a restaurant.
yeah,
And now what I do, speaking in front of large groups of people, is something that
yeah,
was that impossible
yeah,
without running. And it
yeah.
really, kind of an exposure therapy. The more you do it, you just
It
get
is.
stronger.
Yeah,
Um,
100%. Yeah.
how has your experience been with mental health and with running? How have those two things become congruent for you?
Yeah, I don't really, because I know we'll go further on a bit better mental health later on, so I don't want to open up Pandora's box yet. But yeah, if I still have my medications, but if I didn't have the running to go along the side of it, you know, the balance wouldn't be right. I'd be here instead of here, you know, and this is how I do it, you know, on that as well. Because if I didn't have my run, I was injured during COVID. And literally, you know, the downer, you know, I mean, we've been there. That's what I called the abyss. You know, I was literally just standing over the abyss, looking down into it. And this is all because I couldn't run. You know, I
Yeah.
couldn't run. I didn't have that. You know, and funny enough, I took up yoga and Pilates, which I still actively do now.
Hmm.
You know, which has helped during that. But yeah, if I didn't have my running, yeah, I think, you know, again with my addictive personality, I think I'll not be very honest with you, really, Todd, but I think I've been a spot of bother. You know, so
Yeah.
yeah, it keeps me where it is.
Yeah, I remember I was injured 2 years ago. I don't get injured very much, thankfully, but when I was doing everything I could, rowing, whatever I
Yeah,
could do just to,
yeah,
I
yeah.
mean, what does running for you look like mentally? Like where does your mind go, or what happens inside your head when you're running? What's that
Yeah,
mechanism for you?
Sam. When I started my running journey, Sam was always funny. In the beginning, she'd go, "Do you realise that when you come back from running on that as well, you've got 1,000 ideas?" Because it cleared my brain. You know, it cleared
Yeah.
my brain. It gave me that I was like, actually, you know what? I'm going to stop. I'm going to think. I'm going to contemplate life, you know, and that as well. And then that went into my personal life. And then when I worked for a very famous retailer in the UK, but all of a sudden, my bosses, even my senior bosses, were saying, "Paul, we've noticed when you're running, your mind expands, it opens up." You know, and this is because I'm thinking all the time, and I'm saying, right, maybe I haven't done this, I haven't done this, I haven't done that. So it gives you clarity in the brain, you know,
Yeah.
where I zone myself out, but not zone myself out from the pain of running. I just zone myself out because it's what I call me time. You know, I can
Yeah.
take it in, you know, and I can analyze how the day's gone. You know, I can feel if I feel I'm going to that abyss, you know, I'm lacing up and I'm just going out. Might just be a run round the block, you know. It's just
Yeah.
freeing that mind up, freeing the spirit up.
Yeah. It was around the block for me for a long time. Just to get out
Yeah,
and come back without a panic attack was all I
yeah,
could muster.
yeah.
Um, I think, for a lot of people, well, and interesting enough, I was actually talking here at the university a couple of days ago, and have a slide presentation though. And one of those slides, I was talking about how when you watch, we have a lot of pharmaceutical commercials here in the States.
Mm,
And I was actually watching a the World Series here. This is
Yeah.
not the World Series, but I was
Yeah.
watching the World Series
Yeah.
a couple of days ago or last week with Leslie, and we had the sound off during the commercials, and there was a pharmaceutical commercial on, and it made me realize something, that I think there's a culture around, and I'm going to turn this back around to running.
Yeah.
There's a culture around medication and mental health. Next time one of those commercials comes on, turn the sound off. You're going to
Yeah.
see dogs jumping through hoops and hot air balloons, and
Yeah.
people smiling and having the best day of their life. Meanwhile, all the
Yeah.
horrible death side effects are scrolling on the bottom. But what is
Yeah.
that message? That message is, if you take this pill, you're going to have the best life ever. But
Agree.
one of my slides in my presentation is a person down in a hole or a void or an abyss, like you said. I like that word. I'm probably going to steal it.
Yeah. No, use it. Use it.
And there's a
Yeah.
ladder in the background. And the
Yeah.
analogy I use is that the ladder is medication, right? And it might make us feel better if we're in that abyss and we have that ladder there. But like the commercial, it's not going to change anything until we do the work. We have to climb the ladder. We have to run. We have to knit. We have to do puzzles. We have to go to therapy. We have to do the work and there, I asked rooms full of doctors, is there a medication that changes the way we feel about ourselves and our past? And they have nobody says a word. And then I asked, well, why are we treating people that way with medication, expecting that to happen? And just like you said, with running, with therapy, with all of it, we have to do the work. And that's very important. I'm going to shoot some statistics out here for everybody. And this is Men's Mental Health Month. So we're going to largely focus on men's mental health. That's why Paulie is here today. 1 in 9 men experience depression. 1 in 10 experience anxiety disorders. 1 in 12 experience PTSD. Here's the surprising one, and a lot of people know this. 74% of men never report their mental illness. 74%. Knowing that, 42% of men with mental health receive treatment. So 42% of all men have treatment. What would that number be if the other 74% also reported their? Men account for 75% of suicides in the United States. And this is all pulling for me. I didn't have time to look at what, I'm sure it's comparable where you are.
It is.
Yeah.
The biggest suicide rate. Yeah. It's young men in the UK.
One of the big, probably the biggest problem we have here is veterans. I work with the VA and a lot of veterans here, and there's just not the support for those people, especially the men and the that are coming back from things. Most of men are more likely to, as you have elucidated, to engage in drug abuse, substance abuse, things like that. And then just turning it back to suicide really quickly. I did have a suicide attempt in my early 20s when my schizophrenia was acting up in the beginning, and I didn't know what was going on, and I couldn't engage, didn't tell anybody, and just was struggling in silence. Again, I was a person for 15 years that didn't tell anybody I had this going on. So, there's that. And men are like 10 times more likely to end their life on the first try. I think because they use a lot more extreme measures like handguns and things like that. And they're 31% less likely to tell anybody they're struggling before they do it. And women are the opposite, which is equally an issue on its own, but we're here for men's mental health. So I wanted to ask you what the culture is surrounding mental health in your country in England.
Really, really good question, Todd. You can almost break it up by decades of where we go, and I'll go into my personal life a bit more later. But I came from a very, very hardline family where you just get on with it. Nothing wrong with you. Just get on with it. Pull your socks up and get on with it. So I knew I had issues and problems. I got my first gastric ulcer at the age of 15 through stress related, because I was so stressed out about life. But you know what, I just ignored it. And I always remember this. I went to the doctors when I was about 20, maybe 20, 21. And they said, right, actually, you know what? We're going to put you on a course of antidepressants on that as well. I'm not really taking much in. And then I remember I was just saying to my mum at the time, you know, oh yeah, they'd give me these. And she looks at them because she used to work for the doctors, and she went, nah, you're not taking that stuff. You know, yeah, no, you don't need it. There's nothing wrong with you. And I remember flushing it down the toilet at the time. And then I thought, you know, well, I thought that's what it is. But it's not until I got older, and really, to be really truthful, I've been with Sam now 21 years, and Sam would always say, you know, Sam met me when I was broken, you know, and I was broken. And you know, it was going through that thing when I realized, actually, do you know what? I do have a problem. You know, I can't go out the door without taking some form of substance on that as well. As with you, chronic anxiety. But the way I used to hide it was by being this super hard drug monster. Here comes Paulie. We're gonna have a party. You know, he's always got drugs and stuff. You know, so you hide behind this charade. But it was only, you know, to be really sure, I mean, I'm gonna be 57 next year. But every year I think, oh my God, something makes sense now, you know, and everything. And for me, as I was just saying a minute ago, it wasn't until last year I realized, my God, I used to hide behind drugs so much, but I never realized, you know, so on that, so that's where I was. But nowadays with mental illness, which I really love, our son Lucas is autistic, but high functioning, you know, very high, you know, so for me, with something like Lucas, you know, I think the school would be fantastic, you know. So there is all about that mental illness now, you know. It's like, yeah, you know, mental illness, you know, is very, very good. You know, what to do. My work, I'll tell you about work in a moment. You know, everything is very, very based on mental illness. But the question I throw back to you is, I'm not sure the US, what the US is like. It's a fine line between helping somebody with their well-being and turning it into a tick box exercise. And sadly, I think people just want to say, hey, we're into well-being, and then tick it. But are you actually taking a step back and going, actually, you know, maybe I'm not, you know, and this is where I think our society has become now. I mean, I know there's some questions later on which I'll answer. So yeah, there is a lot about mental well-being in the UK now, loads, you know. But sometimes I think we've lost what it actually means. You know, it's almost like a product. We're almost selling it as a product,
Yeah.
and it's not. You know, it's in the title.
Yeah, well, you know, that's very good insights, Paul. You know, in my research for my latest book and things like that, I've come across a couple things. One, as far as it is in the United States, one of the big problems we have, I think, stemmed from that World War II generation where our president, Franklin Roosevelt, said, "Talk softly, carry a big stick," which is exactly what you're talking about with, you
Yeah,
know, keep it to yourself, pull your bootstraps up and soldier on, take the hill, you know, whatever.
yeah,
And maybe that's what the country needed at that time.
yeah.
But what it fostered was a generation that were parents to me, to my generation, that, you know, if you were struggling with something, you went to your room or you went out in the backyard and you figured it out by yourself. There was no,
Yeah.
yeah, it was very stoic. And that I, you know, I think that as innocuous as it was, I think that generated a big part of our mental health crisis because nobody was saying anything, and
Agreed.
especially
Yeah.
men weren't. And then all of a sudden, you had this, before anybody knew it, we had this really big crisis on our hand that seemed acute, but it was chronic from generations ago. As far as medication goes, you know, I think there's an aspect of, especially with parents, that, you know, in World War II, again, there's a term called target fixation, where the pilot was so focused on their target, they would actually fly right back into the back of the plane they were trying to shoot down because they had that target fixation. I
Yeah.
think that happens with parents. If you have a child that is struggling with mental illness, all of a sudden, the fact that that child doesn't like hopscotch or crosswords or, watching cartoons. None of that matters anymore. All that matters is helping that child with the symptoms and mitigating that illness.
Yeah.
And as I've experienced it when I was young too, when I was 12, 13, I was put on medication. And all of a sudden, I wasn't allowed to have emotions. If I did have an outburst
Mm.
or if I was angry or upset or crying, I didn't get, how can I help you? Or, what can we do? Did you take your medication?
Yeah.
And that, I think, echoes through society. They see
Yeah.
these commercials with the happy, happy pictures. And, it's almost kind of a joke you see sometimes on sitcoms, like, are
Yeah.
you off your meds? Well,
Yeah.
we're all allowed to act, emotional.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, that's some really good insights, and
Mhm.
it's certainly something that has been a big part of what I'm trying to change here in the U.S. We have a very high level of stigma, and I know this wasn't really on our questions we had looked at, but is there
Yeah.
a stigma in your country? I mean, I know there is here in the United States,
Yeah.
a very intense one.
Yeah. Yeah. As we said, I mean, we like to think we celebrate mental illness, and we do talk about it a lot. There's lots of programs on it. We want lots of like these soaps like EastEnders and stuff where somebody's going through that. So we do discuss it and we do talk about it. you know, if the average, I'm going to be very, very, very English. The average Joe Blogs person goes, yeah, well-being, because they've heard it on the TV. But are you understanding what well-being, and mental illness actually is? But this is, I mean, you're on my socials, which is on there as well. To me, and I know me and Sam, I did the London Marathon about just after COVID, I think it was. Because Sam also, she's here, she's very honest as well, and suffered from postnatal depression. And that we lost a couple of children on the way, but we celebrate mental illness. So it's not something we look at. And I know you do work for your veterans. Sam actually works at a military hospital called the Star and Garter. And she actually, that's one of her things. So she actually deals with people with PTSD, on that as well. And that's her passion, on that as well. So
Yeah.
we celebrate it. So yeah, mental illness exists. People know about mental illness. And even some of my fellow colleagues at work, my fellow managers at work, they don't really understand it. They're very quick to say, if somebody says, "Do you know what, I'm feeling really blue today, or I'm feeling really, really down," I can guarantee you, somebody will say to me, we'll go, just go and see Paul. Go and have a chat with Paul.
Yeah, yeah,
But I don't mind because I'm an
yeah,
empath. Come and talk to me.
yeah.
It's come and chat. On that as well, which you don't mind. But I will go back to my colleague and just go. You need to really educate yourself. I want you to start again, and not to what you do, Todd, but at work. I'll do presentations on trying to segregate diversity as well as mental health and stuff. And what it's all about. It's all going to affect us at some point in life.
Yeah,
You might not realize it's affecting you, but it's going to affect you.
yeah. It sounds like I've talked to a hospital in Scotland a couple times and a few other places in the UK, and
Yeah.
it seems as if your country is, and Europe in general, has turned the page a little bit quicker than the United States. And
Yeah.
I think,
Yeah.
I mean, I don't like being political, and I'm not going to get there, but I think,
Yeah.
one of the things I'm doing now is working with a local here in the state I live in. We're going to be presenting the state of mental health
Yeah.
to the state legislator and then to Washington, D.C. So that's exciting. But, I have experienced a lot of stigma, and I'll give you an example. It took me a long time to be able to play music in front of people. And I went to an open mic to do it. And it was one of the first times I was there.
Wow.
It
Wow.
was a big struggle to do it. And, I was, I had just finished and just come off the stage and put my instrument down. And you know when you this has been one of the issues or the struggles for me for a long time, because until 3 years ago, number one, I didn't have a purpose. I didn't have a job. I was on disability. And if you socialize with adults, you know, if you go with your child to their school function, they're going to ask your name, and then they're going to ask, what do you do? Right. I mean, that's
Yeah.
almost always the second question if they don't know
Yeah.
you. And not just a social anxiety about being in public, but the other thing I really struggle with is that I knew that question was coming and I didn't have an answer other than, well, you know, I battle with my mind that's been hijacked by hallucinations and anxiety, and I just struggle and do whatever I can to survive until the next day. And if you
Yeah.
say that to someone, they're like,
Yeah. It's a mic drop.
yeah, yeah. But
Yeah.
the example of the stigma that sets a very powerful message for everyone, at least here in the States. And this is where I think a lot of people are thinking is that when this person asked me what I do, I said, well, I'm on disability. And the next question was, well, you know, why? Why are you on disability? And I
Yeah.
said, well, I have schizophrenia. And the person stepped back like I was going to, you know, lash out at them. And we have a culture here with violence and everything else that's very, very difficult to uh, intervene into. I've been on television a couple times for maybe 5-10 minutes of airtime at the most, and I
Yeah.
really had to push. I really had to do a lot of work just to get on there. Now, I'm going to preface this with a very powerful statistic. People with mental illness are 10 times more likely to be a victim of violent crime than to perpetrate a violent crime. I've never
Yeah.
been violent in my life, but if I did commit a violent act, I'd be on TV like that. I wouldn't have to do anything. And that's why the stigma perpetuates
Yeah.
itself.
Yeah.
Is there a lot of media coverage like that in your country, or is it different?
Yeah, funnily enough, we do. I know there was a thing over in the States recently where that young Ukrainian girl was stabbed on a train, I think she was. And but this is why by there. But we recently it was last weekend. It was last weekend. A thing come up, and 9 people were stabbed on a train coming back from Cambridge on Saturday nights. And straight away, I don't know about the US, but the UK, we could be so racist. It scares me. And straight away, it's just sort of like, okay, is it a terrorist attack? Is it a refugee? Is it an immigrant? Well, actually, no, he wasn't. Actually, he was a black gentleman. It had nothing to do with the color of his skin whatsoever, who suffered from mental illness. But straight away, we're jumping all over that, you know, and
Yeah.
it's sickening, you know. It's so yeah. So sadly, we do have it. You know, we have it a lot.
Yeah. I think that myth of mental illness or being people with mental illness being violent is very prevalent and just is
Yeah.
not true at all.
No.
And you know, I'm shouting as loud as I can, but it doesn't seem to. I mean, I'm making an impact, but not as,
Yeah.
as much as I want to.
Yeah.
But the example I use for that uh, difference, the way society treats people with mental illness, is again, never been violent in my life. Um, you know, I don't even think I was ever in a playground fight when I was, you know, in grade
Yeah.
school. And but I was in the hospital here maybe 8 years ago for mental health, inpatient, and I had to go to the courtroom to have them determine if it was going to be voluntary or involuntary. They put me in a corrections jumpsuit,
Yeah. Yeah.
handcuffs, waist chains, ankle chains. I was chained to the floor of a van and then walked into the courthouse with 4 police officers around me like I was Hannibal Lecter and, you know, and or Son of Sam or somebody, you know,
Yeah. Yeah.
intensely violent. And I have not been. Now, I also worked with a family who had a father had dementia, and that father would attack them or throw things at them when they came home because he didn't know who they were.
Yeah.
So you have something similar to what happens to me. I've hallucinated people breaking in my front door. It didn't happen, but it's trauma. Um, and he's feeling the same way with his family coming home. He thinks these people are here to rob me or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now imagine if we chained grandpa the way they chained me when we took him to his bingo game.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No,
That-
no,
and
no.
but you know, and to carry that even just one little bit further,
Yeah.
when uh and I'm going to get off this violence topic
Yeah.
here, but
Yeah.
if when Leslie and I first got together, and when you look at this family with a father of dementia, I understand it's a little bit different, and there's different.
Yeah.
I'm using it as an analogy, but the family of that person with dementia gets, hey, can we give you a ride? Can we bring a casserole? Can we, you know, you're so kind, and we are trying to understand. And
Yeah.
when Leslie and I first got together, she heard from a lot of people, are you sure you want to go through that the rest of your life? You know,
Yeah.
and there's not the same level of compassion there,
Yeah.
but it's
No,
really kind of the
no.
same thing. It's not something I decided to do,
Yeah.
just like Grandpa didn't either with his
Yeah.
dementia.
But you
Um,
still, say, you know, you still see. I mean, even you know, going back to some of the people I know in work outside of work as well. You know, if you say somebody suffers from mental illness, it's like, oh, it's not like, you know, like trying to understand whatever. It's almost like, oh, you know, it's you know, and you find that this is what frustrates me. You know, somebody that really, you know, tries to celebrate mental illness. You know, is and again, when you talk about your story just now of courts in chains, actually makes me physically sick. You know, you know, society shouldn't be like that anymore. It's like the old Victorian times. You know, in the UK,
yeah,
where you could just chain people up and throw them into a cell. You know,
yeah. Well, one
not
of the
good.
Yeah, I think, you know, people fear difference. You know,
Yeah,
they fear people being different. And I
yeah,
guess being different is what makes us human, right?
yeah,
And
yeah, yeah, yeah.
so you know, people react with fear and violence to people who are different than they are.
Yeah,
And that includes people with mental illness, not because so much they're afraid of them, but if they really looked
yeah,
at it, they just don't understand what it
yeah,
means.
yeah,
You know, I kind of akin it to being on fire. If you've never been on fire, you can imagine that it hurts, but you really don't know
yeah,
until you're actually on fire.
yeah.
And you know, I think that as well, that the imagine if you woke up tomorrow and everybody on the planet was an exact copy of you.
Mhm.
There were 8 billion Paulies running around with
Yeah,
all your fears, all your secrets,
yeah,
all your behavior patterns.
yeah.
Everyone was exactly the same. Would you fear similarity then or difference? Would you crave difference? If you were in a coffee shop with 50
Yeah,
versions of you,
yeah,
you know, like we've all seen those videos of ourselves dancing at a wedding and we're going, did I
yeah,
really dance like
yeah,
that? Like
yeah, yeah,
all of a
yeah,
sudden everybody in the world is doing these
yeah.
things that you're like, wow, that's
Uh,
me. I think, you know,
yeah, yeah.
but yeah, that's an interesting concept.
That's a really thought-provoking one, that one. I mean,
It is, you know,
you know,
like I introduced that in my last presentation at the university,
yeah,
and there was a lot of whoa,
yeah,
you know, and a lot of questions afterwards about that.
yeah, yeah.
You know, I mean,
Mhm,
Socrates said, "Know thyself," and I think that's
mhm,
also a
yeah,
big promise that a lot of us don't. I know I didn't until very recently. You know, I had trauma as a child, and I knew an abuse as a child, and that kind of set the landscape for me of going through life thinking I had to be a great runner or be a great writer or speaker
yeah,
or whatever I'm
yeah,
doing, just
yeah,
because I was convinced the world and myself would hate who I was if I really saw who I actually was. So
yeah.
I never knew.
No.
And
But
until,
you know what? I mean, funny enough, you've actually just sort of like actually just sort of opened up a little thing for me. Did you know what I was thinking about some of these questions before? You know, and you just hit it. Who am I? Who is Paul? And do you know what? When I go for a run sometimes, I'm walking there. Who am I? I'm a loving father. You know, I'm a loving husband. You know, Sam here should be going, and maybe do a bit more around the house on that as well. But you know, sometimes you know, as I said before, I used to hide behind the charade on that as well, and I used to make up stories just to try and make myself feel better about myself. You know, and you do wonder who am I? You know, and you know, you just don't know. I just even now to this second now, You know, I could go for a massive big run now, and I couldn't come back and go, do you know what, Todd? I've done it. Goes back to that sort of like meaning of life. You know,
Yeah.
what is it? But you know what?
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm on a journey. You know, I'm on my
Yeah.
journey. You're on a journey. You're on a wonderful journey. I'm on a journey. We're on our journeys, and that's how I survive day to day.
Yeah, it's powerful stuff. I think that,
Mm,
if we really get into it, and that's, when I wrote my first book, From Beneath Ice, which was the memoir,
mm.
um,
I love it.
oh, look at that. That's amazing. That's
Funny enough,
awesome.
here it
Thank
is.
you,
Good book.
Paulie. That's
Yeah.
amazing.
Hey,
For me, it was a journey of, not just reliving my traumas and the guilt associated with my mental illness and a lifetime of, not being able to navigate things very well. But it was self-discovery, trying to realize, what's going on. And then in my second book, which is the Crush Model for Guilt, if you have one of these, I'd be really surprised. But this is this
yeah,
one.
yeah. Haven't got
And
one of those. Yeah,
I'll send you one.
yeah,
But I just got a big stack that came yesterday. But um, a big part of it for me was the guilt of it all, and that's something I wanted to ask you about too.
yeah,
Is that you know an example for me would be that I struggled so much with my illness and my hallucinations when it first happened, and I told no one for 15 years,
yeah,
and I couldn't handle being in society and try I was so I went and into the wilderness, and that, and you have the book, but
yeah,
and that was a bad choice. I tried very hard to make sure to not glamorize that in the book
yeah,
because I should have gone and gotten treatment, but I didn't
yeah,
have any tools. This was back in the 90s, we didn't have this. We didn't have anything
yeah,
except the library. And it was very hard to figure out, you know, what was happening to me. And that action of walking away from my young children has still not been healed and
yeah,
may never be. And I carry a tremendous amount of guilt from that. But it's not the kind of guilt that as if I had, you know, uh, hit somebody over the head or,
yeah,
something intentional or
yeah,
insidious. This was something I was just navigating. It doesn't make it better or good or bad or anything else. It's the context of where it came from. And there's guilt from
yeah,
that. And I felt for a long time like, and this happens repeatedly throughout my life, and it happens to people in the book that are participants in this, that they miss their son's graduation because they're too anxious, or they miss something with their daughter because they're depressed. There's guilt
yeah,
from that, but it's not something you intentionally try to hurt the child or whatever.
yeah,
And it's happened to me with Leslie. We recently had a big struggle together with that, and I feel like a toddler playing with a grenade
yeah,
in a room full of loved ones. And I don't
yeah,
even know what I'm doing until it's too late and it goes off, and it does it again and again and again.
yeah.
So has there been guilt associated with the symptoms of your mental illness or somebody that you know?
Yeah, yes, yeah. There's a couple of things. This is a good question. So it's a couple of things, and this is where I've become quite open now. I come from quite a traumatic upbringing. My birth parents died, and I still have had these visions, flashbacks of them being on the floor. I actually live in a town called Brighton, which is by the seafront in the UK. And then I was adopted by my adopted mum and adopted father. Adopted father then died, and it was my mum that brought us up. Sadly, on that as well, she was not the nicest person in the world, shall we say. She was a bully. It's something I've had to accept a bit later in life. She was a bully. She was a control freak. Everything. She was a very high-powered business lady. She didn't distinguish between being a business lady and personal life. And really, it was never physical, Todd, but the psychological trauma of day to day. She even tried to pay Sam money not to marry me. And what happened was she lived in France. She wasn't French. She lived in France. She said she wasn't feeling very well, and I always remember it. It must have been, how old was Charlie now? So maybe 18 years ago. And she goes, "Oh, I'm not feeling well. Can you just, when you're free," which I was that weekend, "can you just nip over to France?" Which it's very easy for us in the UK to nip over to France, and just come and see me. And I thought, you know what, I just can't be bothered, because we'd had a bit of a big falling out about something else, on that as well. And she died in hospital, and there was that guilt of, if I'd just gone over and seen her, and I didn't, because we'd had a row, which she'd always done, which we always did on that as well, and I just could not be bothered. And then the next time I saw her was being put in her tomb in France. So that stayed with me a long time. You know, that if I had just gone over, so it was a battle then. You know, was I right? Was I wrong? Was I right? And even to this day, and I can't say to you, you know, I did the right thing. I didn't do the right thing. You know, but that really hit me hard, and that's when my depression really hit me, and the drugs really started pouring into my system like a virus going around it.
Yeah.
And then the second one, which apart from Sam, I'm going to be very honest with you on that as well. I actually have another daughter from a past relationship, which was very poisonous, a very destructive relationship. And very, it was just a horrible relationship. And I made the decision to pull out of the relationship. So I didn't see my daughter for she was only 2 at the time, had nothing to do with Abigail whatsoever. I made that decision because I couldn't do it, and I had to live with that. Did I do this for selfish reasons, or I just couldn't cope with it anymore? You know, I couldn't cope with the stress. I couldn't cope with the anger. I just couldn't cope with the vindictiveness of it all. So I just said, you know, I just don't want to. But it was later on in life where my daughter, she actually wrote me a letter. And so we're actually in contact now. We see each other 3 or 4 times a year on that as well. But, you know, I was never there for her upbringing, you know, and you know, luckily for her, she had a really nice guy that brought her up that she calls dad. And I'm really happy with that. You know, he did it,
Yeah.
you know, but I just wasn't, you know, so those 2 things, one with me adopted mother, and then one with Abby, you know, so those things there where I look back and go, could I have done anything differently?
Yeah.
Society tells me I should have done something differently, but mentally, I don't think I could have. You know, it's.
And I've struggled with. Thank you for sharing, Paulie.
Yeah,
All this is very courageous, and I really
thanks.
applaud that and admire that. It takes a lot to do that. I know that firsthand. When my first book came out, I felt like I was having a therapy session on CNN. It was like,
Yeah.
um, you know, I think a lifetime of trauma, a lifetime of mental illness, we get used to being in that survival mode. We get used to doing whatever, you know, especially I'm sure you've had periods where you live by yourself. I did too. And when I would be in those, even those periods of living by myself, I did whatever I had to do to survive. And I didn't have anybody to say I couldn't or shouldn't or wouldn't, but I just did whatever it was, drinking, whatever, binge watching shows, whatever it
Yeah.
was. And when you get into a relationship, that behavior doesn't just shut off. Those are habits you formed for a long time, and you're still surviving. You're still mitigating all that trauma and all the mental illness symptoms and everything else. And now you're in a situation where it does feel like you're being selfish when you have to take a day or when you can't do something or when you don't feel like doing something else. But you're surviving.
Yeah.
And so, you know, how do we go from surviving to thriving, right? How do we do that?
Yeah.
And I'm stealing that from a podcaster here in the States. I don't remember what his name is, but he'll be okay with it. We work together, but
Yeah.
I might put that in the comments to give him a
Yeah.
boost. Anyway, but you know, one of the ways I think we go from surviving to thriving is, I'm sure you've heard this phrase in the UK where I was with a therapist many years ago, shortly after my suicide attempt in a group home. And I was saying that, you know, my adoptive mother really knows how to push my buttons. And the therapist said, well, what are your buttons? And I had no idea. and I'm sure you've experienced that, and where we turn the page on our own from surviving to thriving, and at least that's what I've done, and others I've helped and worked with and heard from have done too,
Yeah,
is we have to not just realize what what buttons other people are pushing, and all abuse is bad. It's all
yeah,
horrible. But with time and distance, that abuse from my adoptive mother dissipates somewhat, because if I don't talk to her and I don't get
yeah,
that from her, then it's not as immediate as it was when she was around. But my mental illness and the buttons I'm pushing myself, what, and when you really start to look at it, when that cartoon bubble moves right in front of your face and you can see your
yeah,
thoughts, and you go, wow, I'm treating myself horribly. That was a big
yeah,
revelation for me. And it came in writing that guilt model book that just came. That for me, that was like, wow, I realized the things that I had done, like you just
yeah,
explained, but I didn't realize how that dialogue in my head was just tearing me apart every day.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, it's strange. Do you know what I've always said? I remember being a very young lad at the time, and I can't actually remember. And something happened in my life somewhere along the line, and I put this little seed in my head, which was like, one day I just want to get married and have children, and just have that typical nuclear family, and I went through, as I said, very destructive all the way through until the second I met Sam. Um, and now I've got that. I'm married with two lovely children. Obviously, as we said, I've got Abby that I have a nice relationship with now, and you know what? I'm happy within that. So that's my shield on that as well. But when you go out, and I still see things, and you hear things, and you're the same as I spoke about the abyss before. I could be having a great conversation with someone straight away, and then you'll know it more than anyone. When you get that feeling where actually I feel okay, but then all of a sudden a blackness comes in your stomach. And all of
Yeah.
a sudden, it just comes on, your stomach goes, and you just bosh, you hit rock bottom in seconds for no apparent reason, and then you're fighting out, what's caused this? And then you start to overthink, you've been there, oh my God, what's brought this on? I think, and you don't know. Then you start getting confused, and then you start getting angry with yourself, what has brought this on? And all of a sudden, it comes out. You just snap out of it, and it's
Yeah.
a weird thing. Sometimes I see something on TV, and I think, oh good God, that's what happened to me. Oh my good God, that what happened to me. But I don't, that we have those people, that will go, and it shouldn't have you such right, bullying, harassment, especially when you're a child, and that as well, should never happen in society. Full stop. It's just not good. But you do things to it. You just think, and again, this is where society's changed. As we said, when we were younger, it was never accepted, but it was almost like, that's discipline. You're being disciplined. End of. Nowadays, I remember Lucas, my son, really annoyed me quite recently like that, and I had a right go at him, and he just looks at me and said, "What you doing?" And he towers over me. He's such a strapping lad, and I went, "Well, I'm having a go at you." Oh, why? And it's sort of like, okay, well, obviously this is now there. So, so it's a weird thing, but what I have done, two things in my life that I've always done is, I can look at something and go, I am not basing my life on you. And two things. One, I'm never going to base my family life is completely different to the way I was brought up. And secondly on that as well, very much with my management style of work. Somebody said to me recently, your management style is brilliant. I said, because I don't base it on you. And they were just like, what do you mean by that? I said, because I find my own journey. I'll
Yeah.
take a bit from here and a bit from here and a bit from here. And I find those people that inspire me. Like you all inspire me. There's people that inspire, and that's what I take from. I try and take from the positives,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
you have to go through the pain of the negative sometimes as well. So it's just this human thing to do.
Yeah. I think just real quick on bullying, I have worked with some younger people, adolescents and things like that, and it's a lot different. When you and I grew up, we look like we're
Yeah.
close to the same age, and I'll be 53 next week. Happy
Yeah.
birthday.
Yay.
But
Happy birthday,
anyway,
bud.
when I was bullied as a kid, or when people were, the only people that knew about it were the people around your locker, and that was it.
Yeah, yeah,
Now you can bully someone and reach millions of people.
yeah, yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
That
Oh, yeah,
that's foreign a little bit.
yeah, yeah,
I'm
yeah,
I wonder a lot about how that translates to men, especially to tie this back to Men's Mental Health Month,
yeah,
how the social media aspect, how the media aspect ties back into mental health because
yeah,
for men, because it's different. It's always been difficult for men to admit they're going to therapy or
yeah,
that they're struggling in any way whatsoever.
yeah,
And I mean, and to know that if there somehow the confidentiality of that gets on to social media. I remember before I started what I'm doing now, I didn't want anybody to know. And actually, the way I met Leslie was a therapist said, reach out to three people you don't know very well and tell them what's going on. And that was a
that's beautiful.
brilliant
That's right.
exercise,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
but it can backfire. And there's a lot of people on social media. It's kind of the bravery of being out of range. You
yeah,
can fire a missile on Facebook and then disappear, and the person
yeah,
is left trying to
yeah,
figure
yeah,
out
yeah,
what to do with their
yeah.
life. Um, how do you think that has um, kept men or helped men as far as social media goes? Um, I guess we're kind
We
of
would, yeah,
metagaming here, but
there's a big thing going for the UK. I don't know if you know a guy called Andrew Tate. So he
sounds very
was,
familiar. Yeah.
yeah, he is a most vile, horrible gentleman that is on the socials, which are teaching young men how to be men. Back in the old days, treat your women with disrespect.
Wow.
Fight. This is what you need to do. There's a big thing in the UK at the moment of this gentleman. He's been arrested. Now he's waiting to go through there as well. So a lot of it was where you had those boys that they've become so, and we are talking maybe, I think the stats was something like about 25% of the male youth under 16 across the UK. So that's England, Scotland, Northern Ireland, as well as Wales. On those were affected by this twat, because this is what he was saying. So where you got these 25%. So all of a sudden, they're saying this is not how you treat people. This is not your society. So not only are you dealing with those children or young men that do have horrible upbringing, like we went through bits and bobs, you've now got this guy that has poisoned their brains, and we're now trying to bring them out of this. Actually, that is not the correct thing to do and not the right thing to do. So so
Yeah.
so so from a youth point of view, I think mental illness, especially with Lucas as well, my son, as I said, he's autistic. He suffers from chronic anxiety, chronic. But his teachers are so supportive. They understand him, which is great. And he's learned that coping mechanism. If I'm about to have what we call a meltdown, I'm off. And the teachers reassure him and stuff. Now, I'm just going to talk to you. So that's where we are with the youngsters. But now I want to talk about work and the older ones. So I've been where I am now for about 20 years on that as well. And you can see where well-being has started to grow, started to flourish. Whereas before it's very much like that, I can't come in today. I'm not feeling well. I'm not feeling, mentally stable enough to come in. Well, I want you to come in. I'm expecting you to come in on that as well. Yeah. And I've even heard somebody say, just take a couple of paracetamol and just come in. What is that nonsense? Take a couple of paracetamol and come into work. But now, and this is where the danger is, and this is where men. So I have, and again, of my own choice, Todd. Yeah, on that as well. As I said, I'm a bit of an empath at work. I can see, as probably you can. I can walk down the road and I can see someone's pain. And I can say, "Hey, you're okay. You're all right." And that as well. So you speak to these people. If somebody is off, with mental illness, I might not be their line manager, but I'll just ring them up and say, "Hey, how you doing? I'm not contacting you as a manager. I'm just asking you, how are you? You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
what could you just go for a coffee?
Yeah.
So there is that things are getting a lot better for men. I do think you can sort of you can celebrate it. But the problem is, well, we have in this country is we recognize mental illness. The GP, I don't know if we're going to go on to it or but we have touched it already, so I do apologize. Is the our doctors are very quick to give the medication. You know, take some of these, which is not a bad thing. Do you know what? Yeah, I've got you. You fill out your standard form. You know, one of them is being, do you feel suicidal? Which I never really like at the end of it, but this is one of the questions on that as well. So they'll give you your medication, but the problem is, I think where we're celebrating mental illness so much, which is good, we haven't got the structure. So we don't have enough counsellors. We don't, and there's some horror stories, especially tends to be young ladies suffer from anorexia, bulimia, all the eating disorders. You know, there's just not enough places for them to go. So, you know, if you're based in London, you know, you might end up in Scotland, you know, in some mental hospital in Scotland to get there because there's just not enough. So we recognise it as a nation, which is a great, we'll clap that, you know, we recognise it, but there's not a foundation to support what's going on, you know, on that as well.
Yeah, that ties right in, Paul. Those are great insights again. Very good to hear. Like I said, I have worked with a hospital in Scotland, and they seem to have a pretty, you know, it's a pretty rural country and they have a pretty good system, but still overloaded. I was going to ask you about accessibility. We've talked about how men are much more reticent to seek help, number one. We've talked about this social media aspect and being visible. You know, I mean, being vulnerable with a therapist is one thing, but you know, being like doing what we're doing right now is a whole nother level, and men especially don't like to do that. So again, your courage is admirable. I want to ask you about accessibility. I'll give you an example here in the States. We have the same thing. We have a lot of medications. We have a lot of doctors giving medications, which again is not a bad thing, but I think it's the only thing we have almost right now. I live in a cluster of cities that has a population of 757,000 people. And we have one center that handles folks that are on Medicare, which is what is the medical thing for people on disability. Government
this
health,
is
right?
well, we have the NHS, so I get
So we've got one facility now. What that means as far as accessibility, what that means is, number one, as a man, I was reluctant to even do this in the first place, but I knew I had to, and I decided it had to happen. You know, I'd had people telling me my whole life I had to do it, but it didn't stick until I decided it. So I decided I was going to do it. There were 6 facilities. I don't drive. I can't because of my hallucinations, but there were 6 facilities within a mile of my apartment, but none of them accepted my medical from the government. So I had to take a Uber or a cab or a taxi, whatever you call it, 4 times a month, half an hour north, which was quite expensive. I had to go twice because the medical thing from the government doesn't allow you to have more than one appointment on a day. I'm anxious. I was agoraphobic, meaning I didn't want to leave my apartment. And now I've got to ride a cab 4 times to get back and forth to my appointments. And by the time I got to those appointments, I was so anxious I wasn't getting anything out of it. So, and then as far as medications too, I was on a program where I was getting it for free. Suddenly that company decided we're not going to do that anymore. And it went from $0 to $1,000. I don't know what that would be in pounds, but it, you know, or euros, but it was a lot. It was a big change. And I got lucky. The new med I went on worked out, but how often does that happen? And the last thing I'll put in here is if you're a man and you're reluctant to go in the first place, and you have to go through all those cabs and all that money and all that other stuff to get that, and there's a liquor store a block away, what's the choice going to be? And so the accessibility here in the United States is deplorable. Even just to go and get your medication, but the aftercare is even worse. I was in a hospital for 3 weeks getting stabilized. When the end of that 3 weeks came, I was probably had some of the best clarity I had had up until that point of my entire life. And when I was discharged, I got a brown paper bag with a week of meds and a ride to the homeless shelter. Now, how many people would turn that into a better life? and not
Yeah,
just
yeah,
cycle back right into the
yep,
hospital or even
yeah, yeah, yeah,
not make
yeah.
it.
Yeah.
So what is it like there? What, I mean, how, are we talking apples to apples here, or is that?
Yeah, I mean, it's very, very similar. I think I call them what we call is postcodes. I think you call them zip codes, of your
Yeah, yeah,
area.
yeah, yeah.
And so in the UK, we call it a postcode lottery. So if you're in, you could be very much like if you're in a certain area on that as well, you might be okay. Do you know what? This little area here. So let's just say this little area here, I can get that medication, I can get that help. But if I just go to another zip code, on that as well, there's nothing. So hence the word lottery. So it'd be like
Wow.
a postcode lottery or a zip code lottery, where he doesn't, as I said, yes, you can get the meds. Meds aren't too bad since you know about Brexit. So we went to a stage, when we pulled out of Europe, which we should never have done, just for the record. We couldn't get the drugs, so a lot of people were like struggling and had to go all over the place to find drugs, but especially for like ADHD and stuff like this. But it settled itself out, it settled itself down though. So you can get the drugs, but you will really, really struggle with actually seeing a counselor or somebody. As you were saying, to go through it. We've got lots of, and even like this is my work phone. I won't show you, but even on my work phone on that as well. We have apps now which just go, oh hey, do you know what? Do you know we've got a well-being app? Hey, have a look at that. Do you know what? Someone that's suffering from chronic mental illness does not want to look at an app.
Yeah,
It's just
yeah.
not going to happen. So hence, as I was saying before, this is where you turn it into a tick box. Don't turn it into a tick box. So with it, back with my zip code lottery or postcode lottery on that as well, it can be really hit and miss. You might have a struggle. I mean, with Lucas, for example, when he was diagnosed as being autistic at a very young age of 2, but that was by just sheer fate. The gods had aligned.
Uh,
There's still people now waiting 2 or 3 or 4 years down the line. So again, there, drugs are very quick there. Yeah, you can get to see a counsellor, but you know what? You might not get to see a counsellor for a year. And we've both been there. If you're really struggling, with your mental illness, you're going to, you're going to get yourself into trouble, into a lot of trouble, and generally what happens then is you get, do you have sectioning in the US where you get
what do you
sections?
mean?
So say for example, you have a complete mental break. The police will turn up as well as a medic on that as well, and then they will decide there and then if you're going to be sectioned, which basically means is we're going to lock you up into a mental hospital. And this is what we call sectioning. So we're
Yeah,
going to
they're
section you from
called
society.
holds here, but yeah, I mean
Yeah,
that we have that too.
yeah,
Yeah, and that's actually why I had to go to court when they put me in the
yeah,
shackles and everything to determine if I was, harmful, going to be
yeah,
harmful to myself or whatever.
yeah,
But yeah, we call them holds, but yeah. And
yeah,
that's been a topic of discussion between the doctor that actually Amy Weissman that wrote the foreword of my book
yeah, yeah,
just recently spoke with her at a symposium, and we talked maybe a day or two before it, and I was frantically putting in a slide for this that
yeah,
police officers have a very difficult job. They really do. And
yeah,
none of
yeah,
us really understand what that job is like and how difficult it is.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
That being said, I think that, like, I've worked with a few police departments, but not enough for those emergency personnel to
yeah,
understand mental illness and how to approach situations with mental illness. And a big
yeah,
one is, how do you differentiate between drugs and mental illness?
yeah, yeah, yeah,
And
yeah,
your response should be different if they're,
yeah, yeah,
so, that's a very difficult thing. And we've been trying to put together some questions for officers to ask, that are more constructive and win-win kinds of questions.
yeah,
Like one of the ones we like a lot is, who's your doctor? Because then
yeah,
if you've got somebody that is, we're separating the two here. If you just have
yeah,
a drug interaction going on, that question of who's your doctor is going to get like, what do you mean?
yeah,
But if you ask somebody with mental illness that, you might not only stop the
yeah,
symptoms in their tracks and they're going to, but
yeah.
then you might actually get a name, and then you might actually be able to get
Exactly.
viable
We
information.
we
for that
call that what we
individual.
call an opening or a probing question. So
Right.
you're doing that. I mean,
Yeah.
I've done what we call mental first aid as well. And that's
Mhm.
one, and that's exactly it, Todd. It's one of those
Yeah.
what we call a probing and opening question.
Mhm.
And it's that sort of thing. Where it sort of opens up that dialogue.
Yeah. And really there is just not enough education. They're not just
Yeah,
responding to situations they don't understand,
yeah,
but they're also carrying their own trauma into that
yeah,
situation.
yeah,
So like I said, they have a very difficult job. And when you're in fight or flight mode, whether it be with your mental illness or as an officer in a dangerous situation, that fight or flight mode brings in all those triggers from the past. We're back there and we're here in this moment at the same time. It's
yeah,
very difficult to figure out what you should or should not do in hindsight until hindsight kicks in.
yeah,
And that's where guilt comes in too. Officers have a tremendous amount of guilt in situations that create it. And we do too as mental illness. I've actually been talking to them about this to try
yeah,
to bridge that gap, to make them understand that somebody with mental illness is having these triggers and traumas and fight or flight just as they are.
yeah,
It's from a different context, but it's the same feeling. And then that guilt comes in for the individual with the illness, maybe actions they made, like you and I both have, and lots of people, everybody has. But the officer might have reacted poorly in that moment, but then they get judged by their or criticized
yeah,
by their superiors, and then they're
yeah,
mixed up too.
absolutely.
And that you can take that correlation even further into Men's Mental Health Month, because men are not very, we compartmentalize things, we shove things down, we
Yeah,
cover them over with cars and, whatever we
yeah, yeah,
do, fancy phones and things. But,
yeah,
and officers do the same with their trauma and maybe their guilt when they reacted poorly and then they're criticized by their superiors. It's the same thing.
yeah, yeah.
So Uh,
Agreed, man. Yeah,
I think we've covered that one.
yeah,
Accessibility is a big problem, and I'm not sure
yeah.
how to change it. I wanted to ask you if you think COVID helped accessibility. I know, I know
Ooh,
there was a lot.
yeah,
Well,
yeah.
I'll say that mental health was exacerbated by COVID. A lot of people were
Yeah,
isolated in a way as never before.
100%,
Yeah, I don't want to get
100%.
into that because it's
Yeah, yeah,
way off topic,
yeah,
but
yeah, yeah,
it
yeah,
wasn't something anybody did. It just had, well,
yeah,
maybe, but it
yeah,
did, so we'll move on from that. But the good thing COVID did is it allowed us to use our phones, because remember when I said I had to incur all that cost
yeah,
to go see my therapist, was super anxious by the time I got there. I didn't get anything out of it. Now I can sit on my couch or here at my desk and have my appointment.
yeah,
And
yeah,
obviously I don't have trouble being out where I am, but I used to.
yeah,
And when that happened, it was a lot easier to have
yeah,
effective sessions with doctors and therapists. And I'm
yeah.
wondering if that was the same with you in your
Yeah,
experience.
yeah. I think if you've hit the nail on the head. So yeah, I think obviously as with anywhere, I think in the entire world, to be truthful with you, I think COVID was a big thing. A lot of people suffered from the mental illness, especially if you're on your own and you couldn't go out and stuff from that as well. But it did open up avenues. I know some of my colleagues was here; they'd probably argue the point with me, but I think you're right. I think because a lot of stuff went online. It was forced to go online, so you could have your appointments online. You could have counselling sessions online. Everything opened up into the spectrum of actually, this is the way forward. This is what we need to do. So we then fast forward 5 years. Is it been 5 years? 5 years, isn't it? Onto that as well. And it's a strange one in the UK because I love having conversations like this. I spoke to my doctor when I came back from the desert for my ultra marathon. I've got a nasty infection in my foot, so it was just like, actually, Paul, do you know what? Do you want to come and see me? I went, no. Do you want a video conference? Lovely. So I'm showing them my foot. I'm having a conversation like I'm having now, and it really works for me. I like that. Because
Yeah.
a one-to-one interaction, but with other people, actually, I want to go and see my doctor. I want to physically be with them. I want to see
Yeah.
a counsellor. I mean, I know where we work, where I work, and I'll give them their dues. They did okay. You know, we sort of like linked up with a company, all about well-being and wellness and stuff. You know, and if you were struggling, you know, you could ring these people up, have an appointment, and you know, you'd get 5 free sessions. You know, so it was good for the people that are, you know, as if somebody says what we call a referral. If I have one of my team up in the pool, you know, I'm really struggling at the moment. But it's a fine line because you don't want to turn it into a tick box, you know. So you ask those probing questions. So, you know, are you aware that you can actually get free counselling through our No, I didn't know that. I wasn't aware of that. And then you can organise it and then plan it, you know, on that as
Yeah.
well. So yeah, so COVID's got a lot to answer, negative and positive. You know,
Yeah. And,
so
you know,
so
some of the doctors I've worked with have said
yeah,
that it's tipping a little bit back the other way where
yeah,
they miss kind of what you're saying, I think,
yeah,
along those lines, at least for a psychologist or especially maybe a therapist.
yeah.
There's a lot going on that like you can't see below here on me. You
Yeah,
can't see my
yeah,
body language. You can't see if I'm tapping my
yeah,
foot a lot. I'm
yeah,
not,
yeah,
but you
yeah,
know, and I used to. You can't see what their house looks like. They can blur the background. They could put the moon behind them if they want. They're,
yeah,
you know,
yeah,
I think it's positive, especially for rural
yeah,
areas, to
yeah,
really
yeah,
help people.
yeah,
But it's a lot easier to hide what's actually going on, I think, too,
yeah,
than actually sitting in an office with someone.
yeah, yeah. I think you've opened, you know, you've actually just opened up my eyes to that actually, because I think you're right. You know, I think for that situation where you need to have a proper counselling, yeah, I think you have to be there for your psychologist or counsellor to literally. And you're right. I need to gauge your body language. I need to see what's actually going on. And you're right. I can't see. I can see your face. You know, oh, we look
Yeah,
great. We could all
I can
end
stand
that
up
week
at you.
great. Yeah, you know,
I'm wearing
we could,
pants,
yeah,
Paul.
yeah. I'm not. No, I'm just joking. I'm wearing my running stuff.
Well,
Yeah, so,
there's more than that too. I mean, you know, if you have not just body language,
yeah,
but if somebody's in your office, you can tell if they haven't bathed, which is a big problem a
yeah,
lot of times. It was for me for a long time because I felt
yeah,
very vulnerable in my shower because I had hallucinated people breaking in. I lived in a very chaotic, kind of low
yeah, yeah,
income apartment, and
yeah,
it was so you can tell things like that. I want
yeah,
to switch up here just real quick, and then we're going to finish, Paulie.
yeah, yeah,
What sort of things, other than we covered running, but are
yeah.
there other mental health coping mechanisms you've or skills that you've developed, or any of that you've helped others with that have really been good
Yeah,
to you?
you know, I touched on before where I like to class myself as an empath. You know, so I actually like listening to people's pain. You know, I actually like taking it on. You know, if and even if you can sort of just say, like, actually, you know, I just want to sit down. Let's go for a coffee. Let's have a chat. One of my closest friends, mum passed away of cancer a couple of days ago. You know, so it's like, actually, you know what? It's just having that connection with someone. So, you know, and for me, it's very straightforward, Todd. It's all about communication, and I do love the term this. You know, there's 2 ways of saying it. How are you and how are you? There's how are you? I literally don't care. I just need to say how are you because I'm walking past you. Or do you know what, Todd? How are you? How are you actually doing? You know, and that's generally where you open up that dialogue. So I love talking to people, you know, because I've gone through a lot of things, and not a good percentage. I mean, if I was to put it at a percentage, do you know what? I probably think that maybe 70% of people, they just want somebody to hear them. I just want someone to listen to me. There might not actually be anything wrong, but because after they'll go, do you know, I think I needed that. You know, so I really enjoy that.
Yeah.
Sam has finally, after 20 years, got me going to yoga and to Pilates. So I'm really. Do you know Wim Hof?
I do,
Yeah,
yes.
the
I,
Iceman.
I don't like ice baths,
Yeah,
but I do them because I have
yeah, yeah.
to.
Yeah. So I do follow quite a lot of his mantras. So I'm very much into my breathing and meditating and stuff. You know, so I'm getting there now where that's how I try and deal with it. You know, or I've got some friends that a couple of gentlemen from work, and they're in the UK, we call them geezers. They're real geezers. You know, but what they don't realise is when we go out for a run on that as well, I literally run maybe. 2 feet behind them. And what they're not realizing, they're opening up about everything, but they're actually having a therapy session without
Yeah.
them knowing they're having a therapy session. So
Right.
one of my closest colleagues, I won't mention his name, but we do ultra marathons together. And the first 2 hours, I'll just call it this friend of mine's, it's his therapy session, because he doesn't realize he's having therapy. He's like, oh, there's no way I'm having therapy. It's not going to happen. It's not going to do. But all of a sudden, I'm releasing this. I'm releasing everything.
Yeah.
So it's nice. And again, some people just want some people to listen.
Yeah.
And funny. I went to a course yesterday, and here's one for you. What is this? This is for you to analyze, by the way, not to answer now. What is the difference between empathy and sympathy? This got into a massive full-on debate yesterday. What is the difference between empathy and sympathy? Write it down. It's especially from people like us actually suffer from mental illness. It's a really interesting debate. Very interesting debate. What's the difference?
Powerful stuff.
Yeah, man. Yeah.
Anything else you want to share before
No,
step?
yeah, no, I just from that, carry on doing what you're doing. As I said, I spoke to you about journeys, and that as well. Everyone's going on your own journey. Don't thusly be running. Thusly be seeking personal help for yourself. You're on your own journey. I always say, do you know the Bible? I'm not very religious, but having a degree in theology. So I was doing like so Saul or St. Paul going down the road to Damascus. I can open up the door to Damascus. I can send you on your journey, but it's your journey. Every now and then I need to just maybe come along and just put you back on the road again, on that as well. But, it's yours. And the hardest thing, as we said, hardest thing is lacing up, getting out the door, or accepting the problem. I've got a problem. I need help. But this is where somebody like yourself, and being very, very open, with your books and the social media, myself as well, if you can put stuff out, and let people know you're doing it, even if 2 or 3 people out of 200-300 people are reading that, that's what it is. I sadly, I don't want to leave on a sad note. I live maybe 30 yards from the train station, and this train station has the biggest suicide rate in the UK. On there as well, on that as well. So if you can open up and you can have these dialogues, on that as well, and say, hey, do you know what? There is somebody trying that. That's what you need to do. Keep beating down those doors. You can't go through every door, but keep beating it, and eventually it will fall.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Paulie. I admire your courage.
Pleasure,
And
man.
just
Yeah.
wonderful to have you speaking here with us today. Do you happen to know the suicide hotline number? And if you don't, I can put it in the description.
We have a lovely people called the Samaritans. In the UK. What I'll do is I'll message you in a minute with the number on that as well.
I'm going to put that in the comments for everyone. I appreciate everybody joining us here today. They're not here yet because this isn't live, but it will be. And I really appreciate everybody watching. If you want to reach out to me, if you have something you want me to share, speak about, discuss, you can reach me at crushingimpossible@gmail.com. I monitor that every single day. This is a 24/7 thing for me. I don't know, when I'm messaging people, so you might get a message back in the middle of the night, but you can message me 24/7 on Facebook. Todd Arkyn Crush is my name there and where I am here. The suicide number in the United States is 988. Please dial it if you're struggling, and don't hesitate to help someone else. And like Paulie said, sometimes you just got to go over and sit with someone, have a meal or have a coffee and just talk about your day. Maybe they just need that. Khalil Gibran said, don't seek out people with time to kill, seek them with time to live. And we need to start doing that. And we need to start, we need to change the way the world speaks about, treats mental illness and trauma. So Paulie, thank you very much for joining me. Again, I really appreciate your courage and everything here. And stay on after I stop this and talk to you for a bit. But thank you. Be strong, warriors. Run.